In January 2018, a man named Trevor Milton posted a video to YouTube. The video showed a sleek, futuristic semi-truck gliding silently down a desert highway. No engine noise, no exhaust, just smooth, effortless motion. The truck was called the Nikola 1, and according to Trevor Milton, it was going to change everything. It would run on hydrogen, produce zero emissions, outperform diesel trucks, and cost less to operate. This wasn't just an incremental improvement, this was a revolution. The future of transportation captured in 2 minutes of video, and investors believed him. By June 2020, 2.5 years after that video, Nikola Corporation went public and hit a market valuation of $34 billion, $34 billion, for a company that had never sold a single truck, never generated $1 in revenue, never delivered a product to a customer, just a promise and a video. 3 months later, Trevor Milton resigned in disgrace. 2 years after that, in October 2022, he was convicted of fraud. In December 2023, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And the truck in that video, the one gliding smoothly down the highway, it wasn't driving, it had no powertrain, no hydrogen fuel cells, no revolutionary technology. It was rolling downhill. They towed it to the top of a hill, pointed it down a slight grade, released the brakes, and filmed it coasting. That's it. A $34 billion valuation built on a truck rolling down a hill. But here's what makes this story more than just another fraud case. Trevor Milton didn't start out planning to commit fraud. He genuinely believed, or convinced himself he believed, that he could build what he promised, and thousands of smart people, institutional investors, engineers, journalists, they all believed him too. Not because they were stupid, but because the lie was wrapped in something that looked exactly like innovation. And once you understand how that worked, you start to see the same pattern everywhere. To understand how Trevor Milton pulled this off, you need to understand where he came from and what the world looked like when he started. Trevor grew up in Utah, dropped out of college, spent his 20s bouncing between sales jobs and startups. He wasn't an engineer, wasn't a scientist, had no background in automotive technology or hydrogen fuel cells. What he had was charisma and an ability to sell a vision. In 2009, he started a company called dHybrid, selling natural gas storage systems for trucks. It didn't go anywhere. He tried again with another venture. That didn't work either. But he learned something important. The transportation industry was looking for alternatives to diesel. Environmental regulations were getting stricter, fuel costs were rising. Tesla had proven that electric vehicles could be sexy and valuable. There was an appetite for disruption. In 2014, Trevor started thinking about hydrogen not because he understood the technology deeply, but because he understood the narrative. Electric cars were getting attention, but they had problems. Limited range, long charging times, heavy batteries. Hydrogen seemed like an answer. You could refuel a hydrogen vehicle in minutes, just like gasoline. Hydrogen fuel cells produced only water as emission, and the energy density was better than batteries. On paper, hydrogen was perfect. And almost nobody was doing it for heavy trucks. Tesla was focused on passenger cars. Traditional truck manufacturers were still mostly building diesel. There was a gap in the market, and more importantly, there was a gap in the story. Trevor saw that gap and decided to fill it. He founded Nikola Motor Company in 2014, named after Nikola Tesla, because why not associate yourself with one of history's greatest inventors? The pitch was simple: we're going to build hydrogen electric semi-trucks that will outperform diesel in every way. Better range, better power, lower operating costs, zero emissions. We're going to build a network of hydrogen fueling stations across America. We're going to transform the entire trucking industry. It was an audacious vision, the kind of thing that gets people excited. And Trevor was very good at getting people excited. He wasn't selling trucks, he was selling the future. And the future is easier to sell than the present because nobody can prove you wrong yet. But there was a problem. Building a hydrogen electric truck is incredibly difficult. Hydrogen fuel cells are complex, expensive, and temperamental. You need to store hydrogen at extremely high pressure or extremely low temperature. You need to build an entirely new fueling infrastructure because there are almost no hydrogen stations for trucks. You need to solve engineering problems that even major automotive companies with billions in R&D budgets struggle with. Trevor didn't have billions in R&D. He didn't have a team of experienced engineers. What he had was PowerPoint presentations and a talent for fundraising. So he did what a lot of startup founders do. He decided to fake it till he made it. In January 2018, Nikola released that promotional video. The truck gliding down the highway, silent and smooth, looking every bit like a functional hydrogen electric vehicle. The video was professionally shot, beautifully edited, set to inspiring music. It looked like an Apple commercial, and it worked. The video went viral in trucking and investment circles, news outlets covered it, investors started calling. Here was a visual proof that Nikola had a working truck, except they didn't. The truck in the video, the Nikola 1 prototype, had no hydrogen fuel cells, no motor, no powertrain at all. It was a shell, a very expensive, very well-designed shell, but just a shell. So how did they film it moving? They found a long stretch of road in Utah with a slight downhill grade, just a couple degrees, barely perceptible to the eye, but enough to let a heavy vehicle roll on its own. They towed the truck to the top of the road using another vehicle. They positioned cameras at various points along the route. They released the brakes and let gravity do the work. The truck rolled down the hill, while cameras captured it from multiple angles. In post-production, they edited the footage to make it look like the truck was driving under its own power. They added engine sounds, even though there was no engine. They showed the speedometer, the dashboard, all functioning. It looked completely real, and technically they never explicitly said the truck was driving under its own power in the video. They just showed it moving and let people assume. This is a key tactic in sophisticated fraud. You don't lie directly, you create a misleading impression and let other people come to the wrong conclusion. If someone accuses you later, you can say, we never actually claimed that, you just interpreted it that way. It gives you plausible deniability. The video didn't have a voiceover saying this truck is driving on hydrogen power right now. It just showed the truck moving in a way that any reasonable person would interpret as driving. And that's exactly what happened. Investors, journalists, potential customers, they all saw that video and thought Nikola has a working prototype. They're further along than we thought. This is real. The video transformed Nikola's credibility overnight. Before the video, they were a startup with a PowerPoint and a founder making big promises. After the video, they were a company with apparent working technology. That perception opened doors. Trevor started landing meetings with major truck fleet operators. He started getting interest from strategic partners. And most importantly, he started raising serious money. Back in June 2016, even before the famous rolling truck video, Nikola had already announced they'd taken deposits for 7,000 trucks worth $2.3 billion in pre-orders. 7,000 trucks. They hadn't built a single functional truck, but they had billions in theoretical future demand. This is a pattern you see in a lot of startup fraud. You use fake or misleading demonstrations to create credibility. You use that credibility to raise money and attract attention. You use the money and attention to create more impressive fake demonstrations, and the cycle builds on itself. Trevor wasn't just building a company, he was building a reality distortion field. He was incredibly active on social media, posting updates, responding to skeptics, sharing photos of trucks under construction, factories being built, partnerships being announced. He created a constant stream of activity that made it feel like Nikola was racing toward production. He announced a partnership with Bosch to supply fuel cells. He announced plans to build a massive factory in Arizona. He showed off new truck designs. Every announcement generated headlines, and each headline brought in more investors, more attention, more momentum. By 2018, Nikola was one of the hottest companies in the EV space. They weren't public yet, but private investors were valuing the company at over $1 billion. Trevor was being profiled in business magazines, he was speaking at conferences, he was being compared to Elon Musk, and he leaned into that comparison. Like Musk, he was a controversial figure who attacked critics on Twitter. Like Musk, he made ambitious promises about timelines and capabilities. Like Musk, he positioned himself as a visionary taking on an entrenched industry. The difference was Musk had actually built working products. Tesla had produced hundreds of thousands of cars. SpaceX had launched rockets to orbit. Trevor had produced videos and promises, but the market didn't seem to care about that distinction. This was the era of peak startup mania. WeWork was valued at $47 billion despite losing money on every dollar of revenue. Uber and Lyft went public at massive valuations despite never turning a profit. The market was rewarding vision and growth over profits and fundamentals. If you had a compelling story about disrupting a massive industry, if you could point to growing user numbers or pre-orders or partnership announcements, investors would fund you almost regardless of whether you had a viable business model. Nikola fit perfectly into this environment. They were disrupting trucking, one of the largest industries in America. They had pre-orders, they had partnerships, they had a charismatic founder. The fact that they hadn't actually built a working truck yet, that was just an engineering problem, and engineering problems can be solved with enough money. In 2020, Nikola decided to go public, but they didn't do a traditional IPO. Instead, they used something called a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company. Here's how it works. A SPAC is essentially a blank check company. Investors put money into the SPAC, which then goes public as an empty shell. The SPAC then finds a private company to merge with. When the merger completes, the private company becomes public without going through the normal IPO process. Why does this matter? Because in a traditional IPO, the company has to file detailed disclosures with the SEC, go through months of scrutiny, meet with investors who will ask hard questions about the business. In a SPAC merger, the disclosure requirements are looser, and the timeline is faster. It's easier to get away with optimistic projections and vague claims. Nikola announced they were merging with a SPAC called VectoIQ in March 2020. The merger valued Nikola at $3.3 billion, but more importantly, Nikola made incredibly aggressive projections about their future. They projected $600 million in revenue in 2021, more than $3 billion by 2024. They projected positive cash flow within 3 years. They projected producing tens of thousands of trucks annually. These projections were based on absolutely nothing. They still didn't have a working truck. They still hadn't sold anything, but the projections didn't have to be realistic. They just had to be exciting. And they were very exciting. The merger completed in June 2020, and Nikola started trading on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol NKLA. What happened next was insane. The stock opened around $30. Within days, it hit $60, then $70, then $90. At its peak, Nikola's market capitalization hit $34 billion. $34 billion for a company with zero revenue, zero products, and a founder whose main accomplishment was filming a truck rolling down a hill. For context, Ford Motor Company, which actually produces millions of vehicles a year, was valued at about $25 billion at the same time. The market was saying Nikola, which had never built a truck, was worth more than Ford, which had been building trucks for over a century. This should have been a red flag the size of Texas, but this was June 2020. The stock market was in the middle of a massive rally driven by retail investors, stimulus money, and zero interest rates. Speculative stocks were soaring. Tesla had just become the most valuable car company in the world. Everyone wanted to find the next Tesla. Nikola looked like it could be that. They were in electric vehicles, they had a visionary founder, they were taking on an established industry. The narrative was perfect, so retail investors piled in. The stock kept going up, and Trevor Milton became a billionaire on paper. His stake in the company was worth billions. He'd done it. He'd turned a truck rolling down a hill into a fortune. But there were people who weren't buying it. Short sellers, investors who bet against stocks they think are overvalued, started looking closely at Nikola. And what they found was concerning. The company's claims about their technology didn't add up. Their timeline for production seemed impossible. Their partnerships were less substantial than they claimed. And that video, the one that started everything, looked suspicious. Why was the truck always shown from certain angles? Why did the motion look so smooth, almost too smooth? Why were there never any shots of the truck accelerating from a stop or climbing a hill? In September 2020, a short seller research firm called Hindenburg Research published a report titled Nikola, How to Parlay an Ocean of Lies into a Partnership with the Largest Auto OEM in America. The report was devastating. It accused Trevor Milton of making dozens of false statements about Nikola's technology, partnerships, and progress. It included interviews with former employees who said the company's trucks didn't work. It analyzed the promotional video frame by frame and concluded the truck was rolling downhill, not driving. It documented instances where Trevor had allegedly lied about Nikola's achievements. The report was detailed, specific, and damning. Trevor's response was to attack. He went on Twitter and called the report a hit job by short sellers trying to manipulate the stock. He said everything in the report was false. He said Nikola was going to sue Hindenburg for defamation. He rallied his supporters and encouraged them to hold the stock. For a few days it looked like he might weather the storm. The stock dropped, but it didn't collapse. Some investors believed Trevor. After all, short sellers have an incentive to make companies look bad. Maybe this was just market manipulation. But then other journalists started digging. Bloomberg published an article confirming key parts of the Hindenburg report. The Financial Times found more inconsistencies. Former employees started talking to reporters, and the story started to fall apart. The most damaging revelation was about that video. Nikola had always been vague about what exactly the truck in the video was doing, but under pressure, they finally admitted the truth. In a statement, Nikola said the truck in the video was not propelled by its own propulsion, but was filmed rolling downhill. They tried to spin it, saying they never claimed otherwise, saying the video was meant to show the design, not the technology, but it didn't matter. The admission confirmed what the skeptics had been saying. The foundational piece of evidence that Nikola was a real company with real technology was fake. If they'd lied about that, what else had they lied about? Within 2 weeks of the Hindenburg report, Trevor Milton resigned as executive chairman. The company said he was stepping down to defend himself against the allegations without being a distraction, but everyone knew what it meant. He was being pushed out. The stock, which had been trading around $40, fell to $20, then $15. Billions in market value evaporated. Investors who bought at the peak lost most of their money, and the story shifted from Nikola the next Tesla to Nikola the fraud. But here's the thing, even after Trevor resigned, even after the fraud was exposed, Nikola the company kept going. They still had hundreds of millions in cash from the SPAC merger. They still had partnerships, including one with GM that was being renegotiated. They claimed they were going to actually build trucks now, for real this time. And they did, sort of. In 2021, Nikola delivered their first trucks to customers, not hydrogen electric trucks, battery electric trucks, a different product than what Trevor had originally promised. The trucks were real and they worked, kind of. They had significant problems, some caught fire, customers complained about quality issues, but they were actual vehicles that could drive under their own power, which was an improvement. The company was trying to salvage something from the wreckage of Trevor's fraud, but the damage was done. The stock never recovered, most of the pre-orders vanished. The hydrogen truck program, the original vision, was essentially dead. In July 2021, Trevor Milton was indicted on federal fraud charges. The indictment accused him of making false and misleading statements about Nikola's technology and business prospects in order to inflate the company's stock price. Specifically, he was charged with lying about the capabilities of Nikola's trucks, lying about production timelines, lying about partnerships, and lying about the company's technological achievements. The trial started in September 2022. Prosecutors presented evidence of Trevor's false statements. They showed internal emails where employees expressed concerns that Trevor's claims weren't true. They brought in former employees who testified that the trucks didn't work as advertised. They walked through the promotional video frame by frame, showing how it was designed to mislead. Trevor's defense was that he was an optimistic founder who believed in his vision and that he never intended to deceive anyone. His lawyers argued that startup founders often make aggressive predictions that don't pan out and that doesn't make them criminals. They said Trevor genuinely thought Nikola would be able to deliver on his promises and that he was simply wrong, not fraudulent. It's a reasonable defense in theory. Where's the line between optimistic projection and criminal fraud? When does believing in your vision become lying to investors? It's not always clear. But in Trevor's case, the evidence was overwhelming. He hadn't just made optimistic projections. He'd made specific false claims about existing capabilities. He didn't just say, we're going to build great trucks in the future. He said, we have working technology right now, when they didn't. The jury convicted him on 3 counts in October 2022. In December 2023, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Not a slap on the wrist, but not the decades he could have faced either. The judge said Trevor had crossed the line from entrepreneurial optimism to criminal deception. He'd used his position and his platform to mislead investors, and he'd profited enormously from those lies. He had to be held accountable. Trevor's lawyer said he'd appeal. As of now, he's fighting to stay out of prison while the appeals process plays out. But the legal case is almost beside the point. The interesting question isn't whether Trevor Milton committed fraud. He clearly did. The interesting question is how he got away with it for so long, because he didn't do this alone. Nikola raised hundreds of millions from sophisticated investors. They had venture capital firms, private equity, institutional investors doing due diligence. They had a board of directors that was supposed to oversee the company. They had auditors reviewing their books. They had investment banks advising on the SPAC merger. All of these people and institutions are supposed to be gatekeepers. They're supposed to catch fraud before it gets this far, and they all failed. Why? Some of them were probably fooled. Trevor was convincing and the promotional materials looked professional, but some of them probably knew or suspected the claims were exaggerated and didn't care because the stock was going up. This is a key insight about financial fraud. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires an ecosystem of enablers. Some enablers are true believers who get caught up in the story. Some are conflicted parties who profit from the fraud and look the other way. Some are supposed watchdogs who don't watch closely enough. In Nikola's case, you had all three. You had investors who genuinely believed Trevor was the next Elon Musk and bought into the vision. You had investment banks and SPAC sponsors who made millions in fees from the merger and had an incentive not to ask too many hard questions. And you had auditors and board members who should have been skeptical but apparently weren't. The SIPC structure made it easier. In a traditional IPO, investment banks have legal liability if the disclosures are false. They have an incentive to be careful. In a SPAC merger, the liability is more diffuse. The banks can claim they were just advising, not underwriting. The SPAC sponsors can claim they relied on the company's representations. Everyone has plausible deniability. This is why SPACs became popular for questionable companies. It was a way to go public with less scrutiny. And 2020 was the peak of SPAC mania. Hundreds of SPACs were looking for companies to merge with. Competition was intense. Some SPAC sponsors were willing to overlook red flags to get a deal done. Nikola found a sponsor who was willing to overlook a lot. But even beyond the SPAC structure, there's something deeper going on here. We're living in an era where the appearance of innovation has become more valuable than actual innovation. If you can create a compelling narrative, if you can generate hype, if you can get people talking, you can raise enormous amounts of money even if your product doesn't work. Look at Theranos. They raised hundreds of millions claiming to revolutionize blood testing with technology that didn't work. Look at Fire Festival. They sold thousands of tickets to a luxury music festival that was actually a disaster in the Bahamas. Look at countless crypto projects that raised billions on white papers with no working product. The pattern is always the same. Big promises, slick marketing, charismatic founders, and very little substance. And it works because we want to believe. We want to believe in the visionary founder who's going to change the world. We want to believe we're getting in early on the next big thing. We want to believe that this time it's different. So we overlook warning signs. We give people the benefit of the doubt. We accept vague answers to specific questions. And by the time the truth comes out, the founders have already made their money and moved on. Trevor Milton made hundreds of millions selling Nikola stock before the fraud was exposed. Even after his conviction, even after prison, he'll still be wealthy. The people who lost money were mostly retail investors who bought in late, who believed the hype, who thought they were investing in the future. This brings us to the real lie, the deeper lie that's not just about Nikola, but about how we think about innovation. The lie is that innovation is about having a great idea and believing in it hard enough. That if you're passionate and persistent and willing to fake it till you make it, you'll eventually succeed. This narrative is everywhere. Steve Jobs believed in the iPhone before it existed. Jeff Bezos believed in Amazon when it was losing money. Elon Musk believed in Tesla and SpaceX when everyone said they'd fail. These stories are true and they're inspiring, but they create a dangerous template. They make it seem like belief and hustle are enough, that the details will work themselves out if the vision is strong enough. But that's not how it works. Jobs had a team of world-class engineers actually building the iPhone. Bezos had a working website actually selling books. Musk had engineers actually building rockets and cars. The vision mattered, but the execution mattered more. You can't fake execution. You can't PowerPoint your way to a working hydrogen fuel cell. You can't post on Twitter your way to a revolutionary truck. At some point, you have to actually build the thing. And building things is hard. It requires technical expertise, it requires resources, it requires time, it requires thousands of small decisions done right. Most visionary founders fail, not because they lacked belief, but because they couldn't execute. Trevor Milton skipped the hard part. He focused entirely on the vision, the story, the hype. He was brilliant at selling the future, but he had no ability to actually build it. And instead of admitting that, instead of bringing in people who could build it or scaling back his promises to something achievable, he doubled down on the lie. He kept making bigger promises, releasing more promotional videos, attacking critics, insisting it was all going to work out. This is a pattern you see in founder fraud. The lie starts small, maybe just some exaggeration or optimistic projection, but once you've told the lie, you have to maintain it. And maintaining it requires more lies, and those lies require more lies. Eventually, you're so deep in the deception that you can't get out without destroying everything. And the tragedy is that sometimes buried under the fraud, there's a kernel of a good idea. Hydrogen fuel cells for trucks isn't a crazy concept. Major companies like Toyota and Hyundai are working on it. The technology challenges are real, but potentially solvable. If Trevor had been honest about where Nikola actually was, if he'd said we're in early R&D, we've got a long way to go, we need patient capital and 10 years to figure this out, maybe he could have built something real. But that wouldn't have gotten him a $34 billion valuation. That wouldn't have made him a billionaire. That wouldn't have gotten him compared to Elon Musk. So he took the shortcut. He sold the dream instead of building it, and the market rewarded him for it right up until it didn't. This is the other side of the lie. The market claims to value fundamentals, profits, actual products, but in practice it often values stories. A good story can be worth billions even if there's nothing behind it. And as long as the story holds, everyone makes money. The founder gets rich selling stock. Early investors get rich selling to later investors. Investment banks get rich on fees. The only people who lose are the ones holding the bag when the music stops. This isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. It's how bubbles work. It's how manias work. It's how we get boom and bust cycles. But there's a cost beyond the money. Every fraud like Nikola makes it harder for legitimate companies to raise capital. Every fake promotional video makes investors more skeptical of real technology. Every charismatic founder who turns out to be lying makes people less willing to believe the next founder who might be telling the truth. Trust is the foundation of markets, and fraud erodes trust. When investors start assuming everyone is lying, when they demand proof of everything, when they won't fund anything until it's already proven, innovation becomes much harder. The real victims of Trevor Milton's fraud aren't just the people who lost money on Nikola's stock, they're the founders of legitimate hydrogen companies who now have to work twice as hard to prove they're not the next Nikola. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We created the conditions that made Trevor Milton possible. We lionize founders who make impossible promises. We celebrate hustle and fake it till you make it. We reward hype over substance. We've built a media ecosystem that amplifies the loudest voices and the biggest claims. We've built a financial system that allows companies to go public with no revenue and billion-dollar valuations. We've created a culture where admitting you don't know something or that your technology isn't ready yet is seen as weakness. Of course, people are going to take advantage of that. Of course, some of them are going to cross the line from optimism to fraud. Trevor Milton isn't an aberration, he's a logical outcome of the incentives we've created. And until we change those incentives, until we start valuing execution over vision, substance over hype, honest assessment over promotional spin, we're going to keep getting more Trevor Miltons. They'll have different names, different companies, different technologies. Maybe next time it'll be quantum computing or AI or fusion energy, but the pattern will be the same. A charismatic founder making revolutionary promises, slick promotional materials showing technology that doesn't quite work yet, vague answers to specific questions, aggressive projections based on nothing, a media blitz that creates momentum, investors piling in because they don't want to miss the next big thing, and then eventually the truth comes out. The technology doesn't work, the promises were lies, the founder gets charged with fraud, the stock collapses, and everyone acts shocked that it happened again. We're not shocked. We know this pattern. We've seen it dozens of times, but we keep falling for it because the alternative is worse. The alternative is accepting that most revolutionary visions don't pan out, that most charismatic founders fail, that most technologies that sound amazing don't work, that building real things is slow and hard and boring. We don't want to accept that. We want to believe in the magic. We want to believe that this time it's different, that this founder is special, that this technology is real, and that belief, that hope, that desire to be part of something revolutionary. That's what fraudsters exploit. The $34 billion valuation wasn't built on a truck rolling down a hill. It was built on our collective willingness to believe in something that sounded too good to be true. And as long as we keep believing, people like Trevor Milton will keep selling. Let's go deeper into how this actually worked because the mechanics matter. When Trevor Milton founded Nikola in 2014, he wasn't starting from scratch. He'd already learned some lessons from his previous ventures. He knew that in the startup world, perception often matters more than reality, at least in the early stages. He knew that if you can get the right people to believe in you, doors open, money flows, opportunities appear. So from day one, Nikola was designed to look like a serious company even when it wasn't. They registered patents, even though many of those patents were for concepts not working technology. They hired a few engineers who had impressive resumes. They rented office space and workshop facilities. They built prototypes, not functional ones, but shells that looked the part. Everything was about creating the appearance of legitimacy, and it worked remarkably well in the early stages. Trevor was able to raise his first round of funding, a few $1 million from investors who believed in the hydrogen truck concept. That money didn't go into building actual hydrogen fuel cell technology. Most of it went into marketing and promotion, building the brand, creating more prototypes for shows, producing promotional materials. This is a key tactic in sophisticated fraud. You use early investor money not to solve the hard technical problems, but to attract more investors, because more investors means more money, which means you can keep the show going longer. It's essentially a Ponzi scheme structure applied to a technology company. You're not generating returns from a working business. You're using new investor money to pay off old investors and create the illusion of progress. By early 2018, when they released that famous video, Nikola had raised about $16 million, and they still didn't have a working truck. Think about that for a moment. $16 million and they couldn't build even one functional prototype. Where did the money go? Some went to salaries, some to the non-functional prototypes, some to marketing and promotional events, and some almost certainly into Trevor's pocket through various compensation mechanisms. But investors didn't know this. They saw the promotional video and assumed that 16 million had been enough to at least build a working proof of concept. The video was specifically designed to create that impression, and once you establish that impression, raising the next round becomes exponentially easier. After the video, Nikola raised another $90 million, then another round brought in more capital. By 2018, they'd raised over $400 million in total. And here's what's fascinating about this progression. As the amount of money raised went up, the pressure to deliver actual results should have gone up too. But instead of using that pressure to focus on building real technology, Trevor used it to double down on the promotional strategy. He started making even bigger promises. He announced plans for not just one truck, but an entire lineup. The Nikola 1 semi-truck, the Nikola 2 next generation semi, the Nikola Tray for the European market, the Nikola Badger, a hydrogen electric pickup truck for consumers. 4 completely different vehicles, all with revolutionary technology, all supposedly coming soon. Now let's pause and think about what this actually means from an engineering standpoint. Tesla, with tens of billions in funding and thousands of experienced engineers, had taken over a decade to go from the Roadster to successfully mass producing the Model 3. Traditional automakers with century-old infrastructure spend 5 to 7 years developing a single new vehicle platform, and Nikola, with a few $100 million and a relatively small team, was claiming they developed 4 different hydrogen electric vehicles simultaneously, while also building hydrogen fueling infrastructure across the country. Anyone with actual automotive industry experience would immediately recognize this as impossible. But that expertise wasn't in the room where investment decisions were being made. The investors were finance people, not engineers. The media covering Nikola were business journalists, not technical experts, and Trevor was extraordinarily skilled at having a convincing answer for every skeptical question. If someone asked, how can you possibly develop 4 vehicles at once, he'd say, we're using a modular platform approach. We're leveraging strategic partnerships with established manufacturers. We're being smarter and more efficient than the legacy dinosaur companies. If someone asked about the chicken and egg problem of hydrogen infrastructure, he'd say we're building our own network of stations. We've done the analysis. We've got it all figured out. The unit economics work. If someone pointed out that there were never any working prototypes shown actually driving at auto shows or industry events, he'd say we don't want to show our proprietary technology to competitors. We're being strategic about what we reveal. You'll see everything when we're ready to go to production. Every skeptical question had a slick, confident answer, and because Trevor delivered these answers without hesitation or visible doubt, people tended to believe him. This is actually a crucial psychological skill for successful fraudsters. You cannot look like you're lying. You have to project absolute confidence. You have to believe your own lies, at least in the moment you're telling them, or be such a good actor that you can fake that belief perfectly. The pre-order numbers that Nikola announced were another masterpiece of statistical misdirection. They claim to have 7,000 pre-orders worth $2.3 billion. That sounds absolutely incredible. Proof of massive market demand. Validation that customers want this product. But if you look closely at what a pre-order actually meant in Nikola's system, the picture changes dramatically. Customers were putting down refundable deposits ranging from $2,500 to $37,000 depending on which model they were supposedly ordering. So let's do some basic math here. 7,000 orders at an average deposit of maybe $10,000 per order. That's $70 million in actual deposits, not $2.3 billion. The $2.3 billion figure was the theoretical value if all 7,000 customers actually followed through and bought the trucks at full price when they became available, but there was zero obligation to do so. The deposits were completely refundable. A customer could put down $10,000, get counted in Nikola's impressive sounding pre-order numbers, and then get their full deposit back if they changed their mind, or more likely, when Nikola failed to deliver a working product. This is yet another common tactic in startup fraud. You announce a number that's technically factually true, but is massively misleading in its implications. $2.3 billion in pre-orders sounds like committed revenue. It sounds like proof that customers are lined up ready to buy, but it's actually just a hypothetical based on refundable deposits that total a small fraction of that number. Most people reading the headline don't dig into these details. They don't read the fine print. They just see billion-dollar pre-orders and think, wow, this company has real market validation and demand. And that perception directly feeds back into valuation. If investors believe there are billions in pent-up demand, they'll value the company in the billions, even though the actual cash Nikola had from deposits was minuscule compared to what they would need to actually manufacture and deliver all those trucks. Then came the SPAC merger in 2020, and this is truly when things went completely insane. The SPAC that Nikola merged with was called VectoIQ, and it was sponsored primarily by a man named Steve Gursky, who was the former vice chairman of General Motors. Having someone with that level of automotive industry credibility and GM pedigree backing Nikola gave the entire deal an extra layer of perceived legitimacy. The implicit message was, if a former GM executive with decades of industry experience thinks this is real and is willing to put his reputation behind it, maybe it really is real. But here's what almost certainly happened behind the scenes. Gursky and his SPAC team did conduct some level of due diligence on Nikola. They asked questions, they visited the facilities, they met with Trevor and his team, they reviewed documents, and they either didn't dig nearly deep enough to uncover the fundamental problems, or more likely they found issues but didn't care enough to walk away because the potential financial upside of the deal was simply too enormous to pass up. SPAC sponsors make money through two primary mechanisms. First, they receive fees for successfully putting together and closing a merger deal. Second, and much more lucratively, they typically receive a significant equity stake in the merged company at essentially zero cost, basically free shares as compensation for sponsoring the SPAC. So if the SPAC successfully merges with a target company that then trades publicly and the stock price goes up, the sponsors can make an absolute fortune. In the case of VectoIQ, the sponsors owned approximately 20% of Nikola after the merger completed. When Nikola's stock hit its peak valuation, that 20% stake was worth close to $7 billion. $7 billion for putting together one deal. That creates an absolutely massive incentive to get deals done and to not ask overly difficult questions that might kill the transaction. And this structural problem exists across the entire SPAC industry. The sponsors are fundamentally incentivized to complete mergers, not to carefully vet companies and walk away from bad deals. Their economic model requires them to find a target and close a deal, any deal that will generate sufficient excitement to make the stock go up at least temporarily. When Nikola and VectoIQ publicly announced the proposed merger, they released a detailed investor presentation full of aggressive financial projections. The presentation forecasted $600 million in revenue in 2021, then projected growth to $3.2 billion in annual revenue by 2024. Where exactly did these specific numbers come from? They certainly didn't come from detailed production plans tied to confirmed customer orders and realistic manufacturing timelines. They came from someone building a spreadsheet and essentially saying, if we theoretically produce this many trucks per month and sell them for this amount of money, we'll generate this much revenue. It was complete fantasy dressed up as serious financial forecasting, but it was presented with charts and graphs and professional formatting as if it were a credible projection based on real business fundamentals. And in the SPAC merger world, these kinds of optimistic forward-looking projections are actually allowed and even encouraged, unlike a traditional IPO, where companies face strict limitations on making forward-looking statements without extensive disclaimers and caveats. SPAC mergers permit companies to project essentially whatever future they want to imagine. The stated purpose is to help investors understand the potential opportunity. The practical effect is that it helps founders and fraudsters mislead people with fantasy numbers. The merger officially closed in early June 2020, which happened to be right in the middle of one of the most bizarre and overheated moments in stock market history. The COVID pandemic had caused markets to crash dramatically in March 2020. Then the Federal Reserve had responded with completely unprecedented monetary stimulus. Interest rates were cut to effectively zero. The Fed started buying massive quantities of assets to inject liquidity into markets. The federal government sent out stimulus checks directly to citizens. All of that newly created money had to flow somewhere, and an enormous amount of it flowed directly into the stock market. Retail investors stuck at home during lockdowns with nothing to do and stimulus cash in their pockets started day trading at unprecedented levels. Apps like Robinhood that made commission-free trading accessible to anyone with a smartphone enabled millions of people to start actively trading. Social media made investing social and gamified. Suddenly, millions of people who had never invested before were buying and selling stocks daily, and critically, they weren't making decisions based on traditional fundamental analysis. They were buying based on stories, hype, momentum, and social media buzz. Certain stocks became literal internet memes. GameStop and AMC, both struggling brick and mortar businesses, saw their stocks go absolutely parabolic based purely on retail investor enthusiasm and social media coordination. Nikola was absolutely perfect for this moment. It had all the key elements: electric vehicles, which was the hottest sector, a charismatic, controversial founder who people could rally behind, a revolutionary promise to transform an entire industry, and a simple, memorable ticker symbol, NKLA, that was easy to find and trade. Retail investors started buying in large volumes. As the stock went up, more buyers were attracted by the momentum. As more buyers came in, the stock went up further. This is the classic pattern of a momentum-driven bubble. At one point, Nikola's market capitalization briefly exceeded that of Ford Motor Company. A company with literally zero revenue, zero sellable products, and zero concrete proof that their core technology actually worked was valued higher by the market than one of the most iconic American manufacturing companies that produces millions of actual vehicles every single year and generates tens of billions in annual revenue. By any rational measure, this should have been a screaming signal to sell. But in bubble markets, absurdity isn't a warning sign, it's a feature. The more absurd the valuations become, the more it proves that this time is different and traditional metrics don't apply. Trevor Milton was extraordinarily active on social media during this entire period. He was posting on Twitter essentially constantly, hyping Nikola's progress, attacking short sellers who bet against the stock, making bold promises about upcoming announcements and achievements. He would post photographs from the factory, supposedly showing trucks under construction. He would announce new partnership discussions. He claimed Nikola was in serious talks with multiple major automotive manufacturers about potential collaborations. Some of this was technically true in the sense that conversations were probably happening, but Trevor consistently presented preliminary discussions as if they were nearly completed deals. He would say things like, "We're working with Bosch," implying that Bosch was a committed strategic partner, when in reality Bosch was simply a component supplier who would happily sell fuel cells to anyone willing to pay for them. He wasn't technically lying in the strictest sense, but he was absolutely deliberately misleading people about the nature and significance of these relationships. Meanwhile, short sellers, the investors who were betting that Nikola's stock would eventually fall, were becoming increasingly frustrated. They could clearly see that the stock was absurdly overvalued relative to any reasonable assessment of the company's actual assets and capabilities. They could see that Trevor's claims didn't add up when analyzed carefully, but the stock just kept going up anyway. This is the painful reality of what happens in bubble markets. Rational, fundamental analysis completely stops working. The market can remain irrational far longer than any individual short seller can remain solvent. Short sellers were losing money every single day that Nikola's stock continued to climb. Some of them gave up and covered their short positions, buying back shares at massive losses, but a few particularly determined short sellers held on and started digging even deeper into Nikola's claims. This is when Hindenburg Research enters the story and changes everything. Hindenburg Research is a forensic financial research firm that specializes in investigating and exposing corporate fraud and misconduct. They operate on a business model that many consider controversial. They identify companies they believe are fraudulent or misleading investors. They take short positions betting the stock will fall, and then they publish detailed investigative reports exposing what they found. Critics argue this is market manipulation, that they're publishing negative reports specifically to profit from the resulting stock decline. Defenders counter that Hindenburg provides a valuable service by exposing frauds that regulators and traditional journalists often miss, and that their financial incentive to be right makes them more thorough than academics or activists. Regardless of where you stand on the ethics, Hindenburg is exceptionally good at what they do. They're methodical, they're careful about legal liability, they document everything extensively, and they have an impressive track record of their fraud allegations being proven correct. When Hindenburg started investigating Nikola in mid-2020, they didn't just skim public documents, they spent months conducting a forensic investigation. They reached out to and interviewed multiple former Nikola employees who had left the company, many of whom were willing to speak candidly about what was really happening inside the organization. These whistleblowers provided detailed insider information about the company's actual technical capabilities or lack thereof. They described how the trucks shown at industry events were essentially non-functional shells built to look impressive. They recounted instances where Trevor had made specific claims to investors or partners about technical achievements that simply hadn't happened. They talked about internal pressure to make things appear more advanced than they actually were for promotional purposes. Hindenburg also conducted detailed technical analysis of Nikola's promotional materials, especially that original video that had launched everything. They examined it frame by frame, looking for inconsistencies. They noticed subtle details about the truck's motion, how it appeared too smooth and consistent with rolling rather than powered driving. They identified the specific location where the video was filmed and confirmed through topographical analysis that it was indeed a downhill slope. They built a comprehensive and meticulously documented case that the video had been deliberately staged to mislead viewers. The Hindenburg report was published in September 2020, and it was absolutely devastating in its scope and detail. The full report ran 8 pages and contained dozens of specific allegations, all backed up with evidence. It accused Trevor of systematic fraud across multiple dimensions, lying about the functional capabilities of Nikola's trucks and technology, misrepresenting the nature and status of partnerships and business relationships, fabricating claims about the company's technological progress and achievements, claiming that Nikola had developed core proprietary technology in-house when they had actually just sourced off-the-shelf components from third-party suppliers, making specific false claims about accomplishments that never actually happened. The report included screenshots of Trevor's social media posts making questionable claims, excerpts from promotional materials with misleading statements, detailed testimony from multiple former employees, and frame-by-frame technical analysis of that crucial promotional video. It was comprehensive, specific, well-documented, and utterly damning. When the report was publicly released, Nikola's stock immediately fell 15% in a single trading day. The market was finally starting to question the narrative. Trevor Milton went into full crisis mode and attacked aggressively. He posted on Twitter calling the Hindenburg report a blatant hit job orchestrated by short sellers attempting to manipulate the stock price for profit. He said that every single claim in the report was false and misleading. He promised that Nikola would release a detailed point-by-point rebuttal refuting everything. He rallied his most loyal supporters and encouraged them to hold the stock and even buy more. For a brief few days, it actually looked like Trevor might be able to weather this storm. The stock had dropped, but it hadn't collapsed entirely. Some investors genuinely believed Trevor's version of events. After all, short sellers do have a clear financial incentive to make companies look as bad as possible. Maybe this really was just market manipulation and exaggeration. Maybe Hindenburg had cherry-picked facts and taken things out of context, but then mainstream financial media outlets started independently investigating and confirming the key allegations. Bloomberg published a detailed article that verified major elements of the Hindenburg report through their own reporting. The Financial Times uncovered additional inconsistencies between Trevor's public claims and observable reality. The Wall Street Journal started interviewing former employees on the record who corroborated the whistleblower accounts. And most critically, reporters started directly asking Nikola's investor relations team very specific questions about that promotional video. Was the truck driving under its own power, or was it rolling downhill? For several days, Nikola refused to give a straight answer. They issued vague, non-responsive statements. They tried to change the subject, but the pressure kept building, and finally they had to address it directly. Nikola released a carefully worded official statement admitting that the truck in the video was not under its own propulsion and had in fact been towed to the top of a hill and filmed as it rolled downward. They tried desperately to spin this as a non-issue, claiming they had never explicitly stated the truck was driving and that people had simply misinterpreted what they were seeing. But that defense was completely absurd, and everyone knew it. The entire purpose of that video was clearly to demonstrate a functional truck to potential investors and customers. Everyone who watched it interpreted it as showing the truck driving because that's exactly how it was designed to be interpreted. That admission was the beginning of the end for Trevor Milton. The foundation of Nikola's credibility had been that video. It was the proof point that they had a working technology, that they were further along than people realized. And now it was revealed as essentially a magic trick. If they had faked that, What else had they faked? Within just a few days of the admission, Nikola's board was putting intense pressure on Trevor to resign. Major investors were demanding that he step down. The much-hyped partnership with General Motors that had been announced with great fanfare just weeks earlier was being urgently renegotiated on far less favorable terms. GM was clearly trying to distance themselves and minimize their exposure. Everything was falling apart incredibly quickly. On September 21, 2020, less than 2 full weeks after the Hindenburg report was published, Trevor Milton resigned as executive chairman. He released a public statement claiming he was stepping down to focus on defending himself against false allegations and to avoid being a distraction to the company. But everyone understood what had really happened. He'd been forced out by the board and investors who finally saw him as a massive liability. The aftermath was brutal and swift. Nikola's stock price fell further. Angry shareholders started filing lawsuits alleging they'd been defrauded. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal investigation into whether securities laws had been violated. The Department of Justice opened a parallel criminal investigation, and the story completely shifted in the public narrative from Nikola the revolutionary company to Nikola the cautionary tale of startup fraud. Trevor Milton went from being compared to Elon Musk and celebrated as a visionary to being investigated for criminal fraud. But here's what's interesting: even after Trevor was pushed out, even after the fraud was publicly exposed, Nikola, as a corporate entity, kept going. They still had hundreds of millions in cash from the SPAC merger. They still had some real physical assets, including factories and equipment. They still had some genuine engineering talent on staff. The new management team that was brought in to replace Trevor made a serious attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. They tried to refocus the company on actually building real products instead of just generating hype. They shifted strategic focus away from the hydrogen trucks that Trevor had promised toward battery electric trucks, which are significantly easier to engineer and manufacture. And they did eventually start producing and delivering some actual vehicles to real customers. They weren't particularly good vehicles and they had significant quality problems, but they were at least real functional trucks that could drive under their own power, which represented a major improvement over what existed before. The company still exists today as a much smaller operation worth a tiny fraction of its peak valuation, but it survived, which raises an interesting philosophical question. Was Nikola entirely a fraudulent shell company, or was it a legitimate company with a fraudulent founder?